welcome to Rainier View and happy Mother's Day. My name is Michelle. Thank you so much for joining us today. For those of you that are new with us, we have several resources for you at rainierview.org/RVCC Online. These include a great lesson for your kids, links to our youth materials, instructions to take communion at home, and more. You can also submit a connection card to let us know a little bit about you and your family, as well as prayer requests so members of our team can be praying for your needs. We're going to have a couple of worship songs followed by a message. Again, thanks so much for being here and enjoy the service.
Falling from the clouds, a strange and lovely sound. Hear it in the thunder and the rain. It's ringing in the skies like cannons in the night as the music of the universe plays. We're saying you are holy, you're great and mighty. The moon and the stars declare who you are. And I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. Forever my heart will sing of how great you are. You're beautiful and free, the song of galaxies. It's reaching far beyond the Milky Way. Let's join in with the sound. Come on, let's sing it out as the music of the universe plays. Singing, you are holy, you're great and mighty. The moon and the stars declare who you are. I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. Forever my heart will sing of you. All glory, honor, power is yours, amen. All glory, honor, power is yours, amen. All glory, honor, power is yours, forever, amen. We're singing, you are holy, you're great and mighty. The moon and the stars declare who you are. And I'm so unworthy, but still you love me. Forever my heart will sing of how great you are.
Let the King of my heart be the mountain where I run, the fountain I drink from. Oh, he is my song. Let the King of my heart be the shadow where I hide, the ransom for my life. Oh, he is my song, and you are good, good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, you are good, you're good. Oh, never gonna let me down. You're 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 never gonna let me down. You are good. You're good. Oh, 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 you're never gonna let me down. 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 'Cause you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh, you are good. You're good. Oh.
It's so great to worship and sing together with you each week, even though we're not physically together. We want to make sure that you are staying connected during this time, and here are some ways to do that. 1, sign up for our church emails. 2, join us at noon on Facebook for the Daily Rhythm. During this time, someone from our staff or a friend of our staff will share about what God has been teaching them during this time. 3, follow us on Instagram. We're a church that loves to be generous and invest in helping people grow spiritually and experience God's hope and peace in their lives. You can give by simply texting RVCC to 77977 to use our safe and secure online system. If you prefer to mail in a check, we're checking that every day as well. You can get the address on our website. If you're new with us, please don't feel obligated to give in any way. We're just so glad you're here with us today. All right, let's join Pastor Jeff as we continue in our series, In an Anxious World.
Hey, my name is Jeff. I'm one of the pastors on staff here at Rainier View, and we are so glad that you're joining us this morning. Hey, we are wrapping up our series, In an Anxious World, this morning. And so if you're just joining us for the first time, you can actually catch up on all the sermons of this series online and look at our messages there. And maybe you just want to go back and review them to really look at how can you take the practices, take the principles that we're talking about in this series, put them into action in your life so that you can better process and better face the anxiety that you face in life. And so I said we're going to wrap up this series this morning, and we're talking about hope in an anxious world. And I don't want to give the impression that this is kind of a, you need more faith, rah, 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 kind of pump you up kind of message, because as we've talked in this series, we've looked at the reality that life is difficult, and faith does not erase the difficulties of life. What faith does, it gives us a strength to face those pressures and those anxieties and those stressors in a new way, from a new perspective. And so we just want to make sure that you understand that pursuing God more fully, it's not going to erase those anxieties, but it's going to allow you to tap into maybe a new source of strength that you aren't currently maybe leveraging the most that you can in your life. And so, because we all, when we think about hope, we all experience times where our hope gets sidelined a bit, where our hope gets derailed. And so this actually is presented quite beautifully in the Pixar movie Up. Now in my house, there's a void in my life from there not being March Madness, and so we created a bracket of Disney movies that are going head to head right now as we're watching them and rating them. So I know, maybe it's sad, maybe it's cool to you, I don't know. But that's what I'm doing in my house right now to kind of stay sane. And so, but in Pixar's Up, we meet Carl and Ellie Fredrickson. And so I dare you to watch the opening 10 minutes or so of this movie and not tear up, because Carl and Ellie meet, they are childhood sweethearts, and they get married and they buy this cute little house. But then the movie shows how they struggle with infertility and they struggle with miscarriage. But hope for their life isn't over. And Ellie in particular has this big adventurous heart, and they have this goal, this hope that one day they're going to be able to visit Paradise Falls. And so they're saving up, but you know what happens? Life gets in the way. And this hope to go to Paradise Falls kind of gets pushed off until Ellie becomes sick and she passes away. And she dies without ever getting to take that trip. And so for Mr. Fredrickson, we meet him. He's in this spot where hope has been sidelined completely for him. And he meets this unlikely character and they take this unlikely journey. And for Mr. Fredrickson, hope is rekindled. But the reality is that we all are like Mr. Fredrickson in different ways in different times in our lives. We all face times where hope seems to be extinguished. And if you're watching right now, we are in the middle of the COVID-19 crisis. And so in the midst of that, we have some hopes that have been sidelined in our lives. For many of you, you were looking forward to graduation ceremonies, whether participating or celebrating with somebody. Right? And as a former youth pastor attending 30 or 40 plus graduation ceremonies, I actually loved each and every one of them because it was this pure moment of just excitement about the future. And so not having that, that's a loss to be grieved, right? Hope can kind of feel like it's been stamped out a bit. Some of us were dealing with hope being sidelined when it comes to our employment. Maybe we're out of work right now. Maybe we have a business and we're not sure it's going to make it, and hope can feel like it's been derailed a bit. Or maybe even just simply, we're missing out on those face-to-face interactions and those group gatherings that give us so much life and so much hope, and we're not getting to experience those right now. And hopefully you're using this time, you're viewing it through the lens of we're loving our neighbor as ourself and doing our part to sacrifice in order to keep others safe. But it still feels like hope is kind of being stamped out a little bit. And so we are so glad that you're giving us some time this morning, because we believe that when it comes to following Jesus, that our hope can be reawakened. It can be reignited despite the circumstances, despite what we're facing right now, that hope can be rekindled and it can be restored. But why should we believe that we can have hope from following Jesus? Like, is it just blind faith? Right? Because we don't want to sell you a false hope this morning. But I love what the Christian writer Henry Nouwen once wrote. He writes this. He says, "There is always a reason to hope, even when your eyes are filled with tears." And so we don't have to paint a rosy picture of our circumstances to possess hope in the midst of whatever we're facing right now this morning and today. And so as we're going to jump into an account out of the Bible, how it can move from just being kind of a story on the page to being real in your life is seeing that you and I have an actual role to play in bringing hope to one another's lives and to others' lives as well in our world. And so we're going to look at this story. It might be familiar to you. It might be new to you, but you can open up to Mark chapter 6, whether you got a physical Bible, you can open up there, or a digital one, and you can download a free version of the Bible through the Bible app on your app store. But open up to Mark chapter 6, verse 30 is where we're going to start. And if you're looking there might be a little header on your Bible that says, Jesus feeds the 5,000. Okay? And so most scholars, they think that that's actually kind of like a head of household count. And that there's 5,000 men, but there might be upwards of 15 to 20,000 people that are present for this scene and what's going on here. And so clearly what Jesus was offering was so transformational, was so powerful, that they were willing to go and, without even having enough food for the return trip home, show up just to hear what Jesus had to say, right? And so what's remarkable about this story, as we're about to jump into it, is not just Jesus feeding maybe upwards of 20,000 people with a little bit of food, right? What's also remarkable is how Jesus goes about doing that and who he invites into that process. And so let's look at this account together. Mark chapter 6, starting verse 30. It says, "The apostles gathered around Jesus and reported to him all they had done and taught. Then, because so many people were coming and going, they did not even have a chance to eat, he said to them, 'Come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and get some rest.' So they went away by themselves in a boat to a solitary place. But many who saw them leaving recognized them and ran on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When Jesus landed and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them, because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And so he began teaching them many things. By this time it was late in the day, and so his disciples came to him. 'This is a remote place,' they said, 'and it's already very late. Send the people away so they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat.' But he answered, 'You give them something to eat.' They said to him, 'That would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat?' 'How many loaves do you have?' he asked. 'Go and see.' When they found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and fifties. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people. He also divided the 2 fish among them. They all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. The number of men who had eaten was 5,000. You know, this is a remarkable claim here that Jesus is able to multiply the amount of food here with just kind of 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread, which, if it's true, right, we have to dispense with this idea that, well, maybe Jesus was just like a good teacher and he had some great morals and he's got some Instagrammable quotes that we can post in our feed, right? We have to dispense with that if this is true, because if Jesus is who he says he is, as is recorded in these gospel accounts, then it's not a difficult thing for him to do. Because just as God brings forth life and provides for his people, so Jesus is just continuing that same thing. In fact, there's an interesting detail here, because if you look in the Jewish scriptures, which we in church call the Old Testament often, when you look at that, when God freed his people from slavery in Egypt, and he led them out from that, and he led them in the wilderness, he miraculously provides for his people. And so this detail of 12 basketfuls being left over really connects Jesus to that same stream of what God had been doing, providing for his people. And it's also kind of a nod to the shift, the change in who is going to make up God's people moving forward. And maybe just as remarkable as what Jesus is able to accomplish here is that Jesus uses the disciples to feed the people. His tired, his hungry, his imperfect, his grumbly disciples. You know, when we follow Jesus, we too get to be part of the solution. Because Jesus didn't come to raise up a legion of angry social media complainers. Jesus didn't come to ensure that we live a comfy, cushy life that's never interrupted. No, Jesus came to offer real hope to any and all who might receive it. That's what he came to do, and he invites us to participate in that and do the same. He offers for us to be part of the solution. And I think that's why there's a difference in the hope that can be found in following Jesus versus just other kind of generic, hope that things get better, right? Jesus is offering something different than just waiting to be beamed up to a fluffy cloud in heaven one day and that we're just sitting around waiting for that, right? Because the reality is that we believe here that true hope is found not with having our head up in the clouds, but with having our feet firmly placed on the ground. When we look around and we look at how does God want to use me to bring hope to others, that's where we discover true hope. And that's really the story of the people of God from this point onward, right? Because we believe, if you're a follower of Jesus, that you've been given a mission to share this hope with others in whatever place you find yourself in whatever your profession, in whatever season of life, that we get to be people who deal hope to others around us. There's a guy in the 19th century in Bristol, England, and he's a Christian, and his name was George Mueller. And George Mueller was a guy who noticed that there was a need. He noticed that there were so many orphans that were unwanted, that these children that nobody was caring for. And so because of his hope in Jesus, he decided to do something because he had his feet firmly planted on the ground, looking for how to bring hope. And so how he did this, he just simply began praying every day for God to provide for him to care for these orphans. That was his strategic plan for how he was going to do this. And the amazing thing is, through George Mueller's just prayerful hope and his effort with, again, his feet planted on the ground, through his efforts, over 18,000 orphans were cared for through his orphanages that he started, and 10,000 of those in his own lifetime, right? So you can imagine the hope meter in George Mueller's life was pretty high. His ability to trust and have hope in Jesus was pretty high. Why? Not because of his obsession with his future one day in heaven, as important as that is, but because he had his feet on the ground looking for, how can I carry out this mission? How can I share this hope right now? And it's very high. And so what does this mean for you and I? And so let's look at this account a little bit. Let's look at some of these sections. We're going to pick back up in verse 37 for what it means for us to experience real hope with our feet on the ground. It says, by this time, it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him. This is a remote place, they said, and it's already very late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered, you give them something to eat. They said to him, that would take more than half a year's wages. Are we to go out and spend that much on bread and give it to them to eat? Now imagine your anxiety meter right now if you're in this situation. Hopefully if you're joining us, you don't work for an insurance company or you're an insurance agent, because your blood pressure is probably creeping up even just thinking about this, right? There's 20,000 people in this remote lakeside location and they don't have enough to eat, and they might starve. We don't know how they're going to get home, right? And so I can imagine people kind of opening up their scroll of the Daily Fig Tree and they're reading that headline news, right? Local prophet causes thousands to die of starvation at Lakeside Rally. And then the subtext, right? Jesus Messiah rating drops 10 points this week. Okay, but in all seriousness, right? This is a stressful situation that Jesus followers find themselves facing, right? They're in this remote location. They're crammed in here. There's thousands and thousands of people. And then Jesus delegates this job to his core team. He says, hey, you guys take care of this. And sometimes I read these things, right? And I'm like, seriously, Jesus? What did you expect from them? They had to be bewildered. They didn't know what to say, right? So they say what they said, right? Where are we going to get the money to do this? How are we going to do this, Jesus? What I love is that Jesus doesn't leave them without the power and the ability to meet these needs. But neither does he say, okay, guys, go back and just stand back and watch this show. Watch me work, right? No, see, Jesus seems to be almost obsessed with his people being able to work alongside him to bring hope to the lives of other people. And so let's look at what happens in this. We're going to pick back up in verse 38. Read this with me. It says, how many loaves do you have? He asked. Go and see. When they found out, they said 5 and 2 fish. Then Jesus directed them to have all the people sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups of hundreds and 50s, and taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, and looking up to heaven, he gave thanks and broke the loaves. Then he gave them to his disciples to distribute to the people, and he also divided the 2 fish among them. Thinking back to when we started this series, we looked at another miracle where we had this amazing thing happening with Jesus walking on the water and he's calming the wind and the waves. And we kind of can get caught up in these miraculous details, but we can miss some of the more remarkable things that are going on. In that account, the remarkable thing was that Jesus steps into this unsteady boat with his disciples. We have another unsteady situation. This time it's on land, but it's no less unsteady, okay? And the disciples are going to discover that true hope is found, true hope is realized when our feet are firmly planted on the ground and looking around for how is God bringing hope to this situation right now, right in front of me. Because the disciples, for all their shortcomings, are learning to trust Jesus in the craziness of their life, in the anxiety that they face. They're learning to trust him, to see that hope can be found right in front of them. It's standing right in front of them. What's interesting here, though, you ever wonder, why didn't Jesus just go ahead and feed everybody himself? Why this kind of thing? Wouldn't it be just so much more quickly accomplished? Wouldn't people have been able to understand who Jesus was a lot more clearly if he just took care of it? And maybe so. Maybe that could be the case. But again, we get to experience hope only by participating in it. This is, again, the difference, I believe, in the hope that following Jesus offers us than kind of a generic kind of when you wish upon a star kind of hope, or just our head in the clouds kind of hope that we've been talking about. Because a hope that is real is a hope that is experienced. And so what does it look like for us to experience that hope as we follow Jesus? Well, I think hope becomes more real, right? When we pray for others and we see God answer those prayers, hope becomes a little bit more real in our lives. Hope becomes more real when we sacrifice some of our finances and we're not sure how God's gonna provide for us, but somehow more comes in than we could even hope for or imagine, and we see God take that and use that for good as we give to the church and we're able to serve others, right? Hope becomes real in that setting. Hope sometimes becomes real by getting in a car and making some happy birthday banners and driving down, somebody's block and honking your horn and waving a banner, right? Hope becomes real when we show up in somebody's life to remind them that they are not alone. Hope can become real in your life when you pick up the phone, that person you've been thinking of, and call them and just say, hey, how are you doing? I was wondering if I could pray for you. And they needed somebody to call them right then. See, hope becomes real when we focus on carrying out this mission that is right in front of us right now. It's interesting in this account to me that one of the things going on, we don't know where the miracle actually happens, like the multiplying of the food. Where does it take place? Does it take place in Jesus' hands and he gives it to the disciples? Does it take place in the disciples' hands? Does the multiplying happen once it's in the family's food basket? We don't really know, and I think that's on purpose. I think it's on purpose so we remember that hope is something that is designed to be shared. We need one another to experience hope. And the disciples, in the midst of their exhaustion, in the midst of their anxiety and their own hunger, the insecure and imperfect disciples experience this opportunity to pass along God's power to others. And it's exactly the same for you and I this morning. We don't have to wait until we reach some magic stage of perfection. We don't have to wait till we have all of our questions answered, that we can be participants, co-workers, in sharing the hope that comes from following Jesus. We can do that now, regardless of what's going on in our lives. And so let's look just once again at how this account ends. What happens here? Mark 6, verse 42. It says then that they all ate and were satisfied, and the disciples picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces of bread and fish. And the number of men who had eaten was 5,000. Remember, the disciples probably felt like, Jesus, what's he going to be able to do with this little bit of food? They weren't expecting him to be able to do much, but with a little, Jesus is able to do a lot. And it's so true in our lives. We don't need to bring a lot. We just need to bring what we have. And when we do open-handedly, Jesus is able to multiply the ability to spread hope to others. And I think when the disciples look back at this moment in their lives, this certainly was a catalytic moment for them to understand that they get to be co-workers with God. And in fact, Paul, who helped establish early churches, he writes this to the church in Corinth, and he says this about them. He says, "For we are co-workers in God's service. You are God's field and God's building." And so I just think there is no way to really truly experience hope apart from working alongside God to see it happen, of playing our part, big or small, to bring that to life. And so you can join in despite your reservation, despite your fatigue, despite your questions and anxiety and worry that you have this morning. You can join in because Jesus didn't ask for perfection from his disciples. He simply asks for their trust. And Jesus does the same thing this morning for each and every one of us. He asks for our trust. Maybe you have been following along in the series. Maybe you're just joining for the first time this morning. But maybe God has been stirring up something within you. And that you're saying, you know what? I need the hope that you're talking about that Jesus offers. I need this hope to face my anxiety better in life. I need this. And you sense that God is stirring up something within you. And if that is you, this morning, you can put your trust in what Jesus has done for you. It can be in the quietness of your own heart. You could say it out loud if you're alone or if you've got family around, you can say it out loud even if you want to. But you could just simply take hold of that hope this morning by just saying something to God like this. God, I don't understand everything, but I want this hope to help me with the anxiety that I'm facing. God, I don't get everything, but I understand that you sent Jesus to die in my place on a cross for my sins. And then not only that, but that somehow, miraculously, you rose him from the dead 3 days later. And I want to put my faith and my hope, my trust in that. Amen. It's as simple as that. It's not about the right formulation of words. It's about, with your heart, really, truly desiring to put your faith, to put your hope and trust in what Jesus is offering you. That hope. I believe it's so profound that it can transform your life even now. If you're watching live, you can put that in the comment section that you want to trust Jesus this morning. Or you can fill out our digital connection card and check that box there that you want more info about what it means to follow Jesus. Or maybe this morning, it's just been a little bit of a gut check that you need to recommit. You kind of have been wandering a bit, and this morning, it's brought back in focus that you need to, again, renew that trust, renew that commitment to continue to follow Jesus. For those of us who are joining and you are a follower of Jesus, I wonder, would you be willing to take this small moment, this small In an Anxious World series, and ask the question, how can I share this? Who can I share it with? Where can I share it? Because I wonder if God could multiply this series in the lives of others and do so much more than we could ever hope or imagine. And in fact, I want to close by praying a prayer today that, again, Paul, who helped start churches, the early churches, he wrote this to the church in Ephesus over 2,000 years ago, and it's just as true of us today. It says this in Ephesians 3. Would you pray this with me as we close? Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen. Well, we're so glad that you gave us some time this morning to join, for us to join you, and that we hope that you really are able to take away, again, some great principles, some great practices to help you meet your anxiety where you're at. And next week, we're going to be starting a brand new series called Influencers. And it's a word that has kind of come up in our vocabulary a lot more recently, and usually it's preceded by the words social media. And whatever you think about those influences and those influencers, in this next series coming up, we're going to be talking about 2 influences that God designs to use for our good. And so we hope that you'll join us next week as we look at these 2 influences for good and see how you can engage with them more fully in your life. Hey, have a great week. Thanks for being here.